Look at that. That is the biggest crowd MTV has ever had. Why? 2 words, Backstreet Boys.
In the 90s, it was a great time to be in the music business. Things were booming, and as a result, expensive parties, big launches, yeah, that was part of the culture.
This is the era of NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys. This was the era where a single hit could sell you 10 million albums plus. They were just printing money.
You had the great sales of CDs over that period, dwarfing whatever had happened in the industry before. The profits coming in were massive.
It was a hell of a lot of fun. From my viewpoint, we were going to get better and better all the time. We really didn't foresee the change in the technology.
We'll be telling you tonight about a method of compressing audio data called MP3.
And that was the end of everything we know.
The birth of the MP3 was a seminal moment for all of media and entertainment.
It would completely change the music industry, completely disrupt it.
It opened up people's minds to what the future would be.
If music is free for downloading, the music industry is not viable.
Movies, books, television, nothing creative has any value anymore.
The music industry simply did not embrace the magnitude of the change, and it failed.
You can't fight progress. You can't fight technology.
The MP3 totally changed people's relationship to the internet, to culture, and to how society works. Its effect was so much bigger than just the music industry.
Would you say that you love audio? You just love it?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure. I have to admit, I got older, so I'm not as critical in listening as I've been some decades ago. But I definitely love music and love audio. And I have to say, with all this great reproduction technology, the best is still to sit in a concert hall and to hear real musicians. When people call me the father of MP3, I always have to add, no, I was, as you sometimes say, standing on the shoulders of giants. But my original contribution is really some of the basic ideas to MP3.
The story of the MP3 really begins in West Germany back then, in the early 80s and even late 70s.
People started trying to compress music, including my own thesis advisor, Dieter Seitzer.
Dieter Seitzer was the visionary who came up with the MP3. He was seeing the original digitization of music with a compact disc and thinking, instead of manufacturing millions upon millions of plastic discs, why don't we store all the data in one centralized computer and then stream it to people in their homes?
So he applied for a patent to use the phone system to transmit music.
1982, that's when they first had this idea. But they had a huge problem. The compact disc took about 1 million bits of information to store 1 second of audio. And the pipe they were trying to send it through, the telephone, could only do about 128,000 bits. For this to work, they somehow had to magically shrink the size of the compact disc by 90% or more.
The patent examiner looked at it and said, no, it's not possible.
Essentially, almost everyone thought this was impossible. There's no way to do this. But around 87 or 88, Dieter Seitzer's brilliant graduate student, Brandenburg, made a breakthrough by taking advantage of this sort of obscure academic discipline.
Psychacoustics.
The human ear has a lot of inherited flaws. For example, 2 tones that are close together in pitch will begin to cancel each other out. And therefore, he realized much of the information in the compact disc was irrelevant. The ear couldn't actually hear it. So he devised a series of mathematical models to eliminate all of those inefficient bits of data that you will never hear. And in so doing, he was in fact able to shrink the music by an extraordinary amount.
Mit MP3 kann ich Musik nur mit einem Zehntel oder Zwölftel der Speicherkapazität speichern oder übertragen, ohne dass Unterschiede zum Original störend hörbar werden. What was done in the end exceeded the expectations of everybody.
The functionality of what they put up was relatively limited. You had to go and get a serial number where you paid and licensed it to unlock full functionality. But the way the software underground worked in the 90s is that practically these serial numbers were available anywhere.
We tried writing, look, this is stolen software. We will send the public prosecutor after you, which, of course, doesn't really work in these days.
It starts to percolate out of the academic audio and computing sphere into the broader public. And by '96, the pirates find out about it.
The year's about 1997, 1998. I'm in 7th grade. A school friend of mine said, hey, there's a way you can listen to music for free on your computer. Check this out. After I discovered my first MP3, it blew the floodgates wide open. That's all I did, every single day, every single night. I was the founder of the MP3 piracy group known as Audio Punks. We specialized in everything from punk rock to ska to hardcore and heavy metal. We had downloaders from Indonesia, Japan, Russia, you name it, people are downloading. Back then in the late 90s, if you wanted to find MP3s, you would go into IRC channels. It was a series of chat rooms that were hidden and invite only. I eventually found these great little channels that kept membership solid by enforcing a upload ratio, where you had to upload 3 songs or 2 songs or whatever number in order to download 1 song. So I would pool money together with my friends in order to get a CD, rip a CD, and then compress that into an MP3. And then we would spend all night uploading the album, putting it out on the internet. We were eventually able to keep repeating the process and have almost an assembly line structure. And in our prime, we had probably close to 1,000 albums in our catalog. Man, now it was almost like a full-time job. just dedicated to these song files.
Did you ever think like, wow, this is kind of like I'm stealing from these artists? Did that ever occur to you?
You know, in the late 90s, we were idiots. We were kids. I started this when I was 12. I didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't called piracy back then. It was just file sharing.
In the late 90s, my staff started monitoring the online space, and we really did see a significant amount of interest in MP3 all of a sudden because of its ability to compress a music file.
The latest advance, called MP3, comes via the internet.
It's the future of music and audio.
I'm sure that there are millions of you out there who not only understand what digital downloading technology is about, but who use it daily to great personal advantage.
I think there really wasn't any sort of panic in the industry in the early days. My team did look at it and see it as not really as much of a threat as an opportunity. We used to call it the celestial jukebox.
Celestial jukebox was a theoretical construct at the time. Every song ever made was going to be in what we call the cloud right now, and would be instantaneously available to anyone on the planet simply by pressing a button on your gizmo. But the industry really did not embrace that opportunity.
I think when we first heard the term MP3, we didn't really know if that was important or how it might be important, and even if it was important, how did it affect us? But there was an awareness that the digital revolution was coming, and anybody who was in a senior position had to say, how do we make this work for us?
We began trying to find a way to legitimately sell music on the internet. What systems do we develop? How do we deal with how we sell it? How do you price it?
Sony Music said today it'll be the first major recording company to sell new releases through the internet. These virtual singles will be released at the same time as CDs go into the stores.
We were working at it, but the senior executives, they still had the mentality of you needed a hard good, and that was the basis of their business.
The music industry was making gobs of money selling CDs. That's the bottom line. So companies like mine, MP3.com, that went to them and said, hey, we want to work with you. Let's figure out something that gives the consumer some value and gives you some value. They didn't want to hear any of that. They tell me, no, the computer is for word processing and spreadsheets. And they couldn't see it.
We had meeting after meeting after meeting with companies with proposals for new technological ideas, generally who knew absolutely nothing about how the record business worked, which made it difficult for them to express how it was good for us. So basically, all of this stuff was for naught. And then peer-to-peer came along and changed everything.
I just stopped going to school. I left my dorm room. I didn't tell any of my friends. I just stopped going. I knew that if I had told them what I was planning on doing, they would have convinced me not to do it, or they would have questioned my decision to leave.
In 1999, observing that file sharing was fun, but was not easy, Shawn Fanning and Sean Parker come around and create Napster.
They were two teenagers hanging around an IRC chat channel swapping MP3 files. Now, at the time, there were all these MP3 files being created, but there was no sort of central index where you could go download them easily. And so Fanning said, why don't I create a new technology that will connect all these files together, something called a peer-to-peer server. My computers appear and your computers appear. The files that are on your computer, I have access to them, and vice versa.
So it was like the ultimate file trading tool, and it facilitated really low friction sharing of music.
Parker's role was essentially the face of the organization. Fanning wrote the code. Fanning kind of did all the technical and computer side stuff.
I was spending 2 or 3 days in a row sitting on a machine writing code. I'd pass out on the desk or on the floor. It was just a blur.
This is a guy who just sat in the basement and cranked for 6 months. It was the first computer program he ever wrote. He went out and bought a Visual Basic book, knew what he wanted to get to, and just kept at it. He was not to be deterred. And of course, it took off.
My head of anti-piracy, Frank Creighton, came in my office and said, I've just found the most fascinating thing. It was Napster. I put in, Madonna's Holiday. And I was like, whoa, that's pretty amazing. That's like the celestial jukebox. We've been talking about this for years. We immediately contacted them and said, really cool system, but you're infringing on copyright. Well, if you send us a list of all of your songs, we'll make sure that none of them are on there. I said, all right, just start with the Billboard Top 200 songs. Take those off. They said, okay, fine, we'll try that. Well, they didn't, and it just grew and grew and grew.
It's called Napster and is by far the fastest way to download music from the internet.
It allows anyone to copy thousands of musical selections for free.
And it spread so quickly that it's clogging computer networks on hundreds of campuses.
So this became hugely popular overnight, basically. It was really one of the first viral apps.
The hysteria over Napster culminated in, I would say, an RIAA board meeting in February of 2000. It was in Los Angeles at the Four Seasons Hotel. I will never forget this day. All of the heads of the labels, literally the titans of the music business, were in that room. I had somebody wheel in a PC and put some speakers up, and I started doing a Name That Tune. Give me your last 5 biggest hits. Every single song that somebody named was available on Napster. Well, give me some old ones, like name older artists. That was on there. Okay, now tell me what you're releasing next week. And sure enough, 20 of the top new, yet-to-be-released songs were on there as well. We used to have this line in the record business that there was sort of nothing a good hit couldn't fix. There was no screw-up a good hit couldn't fix. There was no amount of money lost on a deal that a good hit couldn't fix. I think that was the moment when people said, maybe a good hit can't fix this one.